At least 21 people were reported killed in violent clashes in Mozambique, following a controversial ruling related to the country's recent election. The violence erupted after the country's electoral body upheld the results of the 2019 general elections, which were contested by opposition parties. These parties, particularly the largest opposition group, the Mozambique National Resistance RENAMO, have alleged widespread fraud and irregularities during the election. The unrest has primarily been concentrated in the central and northern regions of the country, where tensions between RENAMO and the ruling party, the Mozambique Liberation Front FRELIMO, have historically been high. Protests turned violent as opposition supporters clashed with police and military forces, who were deployed to quell the disturbances. Mozambique's election process has been fraught with allegations of electoral fraud, lack of transparency, and unfair practices. The government's handling of opposition claims and the ruling on the election results has intensified the political crisis. RENAMO and other opposition groups have called for fresh elections, while the government maintains that the results were legitimate and that security forces must ensure stability. The escalating violence is raising concerns both domestically and internationally about the future of Mozambique's political stability and the potential for further unrest. This situation has also drawn attention to broader issues of governance, corruption, and the need for electoral reforms in Mozambique, as well as the growing dissatisfaction with the ruling FRELIMO party in some parts of the country. The recent violence in Mozambique, which has resulted in at least 21 deaths, stems from a deep political crisis following the country's disputed 2019 general elections. The clashes, which erupted after the country's electoral body validated the election results, have exacerbated tensions between the ruling party, FRELIMO Mozambique Liberation Front, and the main opposition party, RENAMO Mozambique National Resistance. In Mozambique's 2019 elections, FRELIMO, which has been in power since the country's independence in 1975, won both the presidential and parliamentary races. President Felipe Nyusi, who ran for re-election, was declared the winner, securing a second term. However, the election process was marred by widespread allegations of electoral fraud, vote manipulation, and intimidation. RENAMO and other opposition parties claimed that the electoral process was unfair, with irregularities in the vote count, reports of ballot box stuffing, and claims that certain regions were unfairly influenced by FRELIMO supporters. A large portion of the opposition, especially RENAMO, rejected the election results. RENAMO, historically a former rebel group that fought against FRELIMO during Mozambique's Civil War 1977 to 1992, has frequently accused FRELIMO of suppressing democratic freedoms and manipulating elections to maintain its hold on power. After the 2019 election, RENAMO and other opposition groups demanded a full review of the results, citing violations of electoral law and widespread fraud. In early 2020, Mozambique's National Election Commission, CNE, confirmed the election results, declaring Nyusi the winner of the presidential race with over 70% of the vote, despite the objections from the opposition. The ruling was seen as politically motivated and a sign of FRELIMO's continued dominance over state institutions, further eroding trust in the country's electoral system. The CNE's decision to uphold Nyusi's victory led to protests and calls for fresh elections, but the government and the ruling party resisted, framing the election results as legitimate. RENAMO and other opposition parties, however, have continued to dispute the outcome, arguing that the electoral process was manipulated and did not reflect the will of the people. In the months following the Electoral Commission's ruling, sporadic protests and demonstrations broke out, especially in opposition strongholds in central and northern Mozambique. RENAMO fighters have been involved in some of these protests, resulting in violent confrontations with security forces. In these regions, which have long been hotspots for political and ethnic tensions. Anti-government protests escalated into more intense clashes, sometimes involving armed groups. The violence intensified significantly after the government's decision to deploy military and police forces to suppress the unrest. While these forces have been used to quell demonstrations, they have often been accused of excessive force, leading to civilian casualties and widespread fear in opposition communities. The government's security crackdown has made it difficult for independent journalists and human rights groups to gather accurate information, further fueling distrust. The death toll from the recent unrest continues to rise, with reports of at least 21 people killed in clashes, though the actual number may be higher given the difficulty in verifying casualty figures in conflict zones. Many of the casualties have been civilians caught in the crossfire between opposition fighters and government forces. In addition to the loss of life, the violence has caused significant displacement, with many people fleeing their homes to escape fighting. Humanitarian organizations have expressed alarm at the growing number of displaced persons and the difficulties in delivering aid to affected areas, particularly in more remote regions where conflict is most intense. The escalating violence and political instability in Mozambique have caught the attention of international organizations. The United Nations, the European Union, and various human rights groups have expressed concern over the situation.